Hello and welcome to this webinar which will guide you on undertaking the summative assignment for 3 Core 2, Principles of Analytics. Next slide please. The assessment brief will have a code on it. You can see it's 3 Core 002 Principle of Analytics, and the assessment ID is 2301. Next slide, please. So, unit overview. The unit assessment looks at how people professionals make straightforward and complex choices as they carry out their roles. It focuses on how using diverse range of analytics and evidence is essential to the rationalisation and enhancement of working practices and situational decision making to create value. In a sense, this is where HR or people practitioners make everyday choices from data and evidence forms, such as statistics, other forms of evidence to make informed ethical decisions. Next slide, please. So before we start, what I would like to do is just go over a few questions in terms of CIPD insights. Some people ask me about these. Generally, the CIPD insights are not part of the assessment, but are added to guide and assist awareness on the topic areas that relate to the assessment. So these are a very good starting point. Accessing these will give you a useful introduction on the areas applicable to the unit content. So really what you want to do is gain a better understanding and familiarise yourself prior to undertaking the assessment. The CIPD professional map is always a good starting point as well, which will link quite closely to this. So this will give you some grounded evidence before you actually undertake the assessment. So next slide, please. So preparing for the assessment, again, this is the essential part. The preparation is probably more time consuming than actually doing the assessment, but good preparation will actually mean you do a very thorough assessment. So start with reading. This is really critical. You've got to read the assessment brief carefully so you clearly know what you are required to do. The assessment will cover all 8 assessment criteria for the unit, so familiarise yourself with these, paying close attention of the requirements of what we refer to as the command verbs. So within the Core 2, each of the unit assessment command verbs are explain, conduct, present and summarise. So I always say at this point, read the assessment many times. I often refer to this as a shop window analogy, that you walk past a shop window, you'll see things in the window, but next time you walk past, you'll see more. And it's the same with an assessment. Read it, leave it, read it, leave it. So you clearly understand what the assessment requires you to do. Use key points, take notes of the key points that you clearly understand it. And if you require further clarity, go back to your tutor or facilitator and they will actually guide you on points that you're not sure of. Next slide, please. Continuing on preparing for the assessment, it's useful to read and familiarise yourself with the unit specification, as this will explain in greater detail the unit content and what you have been expected to learn. So you'll see in the unit specification for the Core 2, underneath each of the ACs is what we refer to as the indicative content. Basically, this details the essential learning content that you will have covered through learning about the Core 2, again, underneath each of the assessment requirements. The indicative content is subject-specific content that you will need to cover. It's important to know that really you don't necessarily have to capture all the indicative content in your responses to the ACs. It's therefore a guide, not an absolute. Also useful here is the unit guides that were produced by the CIPD on the hub are quite useful to do this. And at this point, I'd like to just bear in mind that learners sometimes would want to understand the difference between achieving a pass against an assessment criteria as opposed to a high pass. So to pass, really, you've got to provide persuasive, sufficient coverage of each AC in terms of what the AC requires you to do. For a higher level pass, you're obviously applying a bit more persuasive breadth and depth. So often these are underpinned by or substantiated with strong examples to illustrate your point. And these are sometimes referred to as case examples, or you might even put in some concepts, some models or theories. Next slide, please. Perhaps the most critical point of preparing for assessments is the resources that you use, or the resources that you actually read through prior to starting the assessment. So I'm going to take some time to just explain the importance of this. Before starting the assessment, it's important that you develop a level of knowledge and understanding of the subject matter. So you will have done this through the taught session of the core 2, but you'll still need to go deeper in to actually address the key and salient points of the assessment. Start with the learning resources section in the unit specification. At the end of each unit specification, there's a list of indicative and wider reading, and this will point you to key books, journals, online resources and websites that relate to the topic or topics being researched. Useful also resources are the CIPD, as we've mentioned, the insights, CIPD surveys, fact sheets, and listening to the podcasts relating to the subject, as well as key authors writing and researching in the subject matter. Use, as I mentioned, use indicative textbooks, as this will give you the coverage of the areas that you're looking for the foundation level standards. The People Practice Complete Guide, which was published in 2021 by Kogan Page. This was written to cover the units in the CIPD standards and is up to date and relevant. And just a warning here, a caveat, be mindful when using web-based content to ensure it comes from trusted sources. So a checklist really just to help with resources. Effective reading is critical. What we mean by effective reading is this is reading for learning, which requires you consider the full meanings and implications of the material and the context. Again, it's important to reread if necessary and allow yourself some soak time. What I mean by soak time is don't do it in one linear process, do it in bite-sized components that allows you to absorb and reflect on the new knowledge that you're taking on board. So just to finish this section, what to look for, important checklist. This is the content you're reading relevant? Is it relevant to the AC that you're addressing? Signpost the main points. A lot of learners use Spider or flowcharts or makes brain dump notes. It doesn't matter so long as you're actually getting some sort of system in place. And does it give you support to the answer in the AC in full, or do you need to read further? And I think once that's answered, you're probably ready then to be prepared to start the assessment. Next slide, please. So this part of the webinar is about the assessment. So the assessment requires you to respond to all the ACs in the form of a briefing paper. So generally, a briefing paper is a summary of facts, so there's no real prescribed format to how you present this. I think the essential focus of the assessment is that you ensure that you address all the assessment criteria, as this is what you're being judged and marked against. So it's useful to present the paper in a persuasive and knowledgeable and applied format, but signpost the ACs that you're being covered through, so that's easier for the assessor and the moderators to ensure that you're covering the assessment content. And so for this assessment, there are two sections. Section 1, which has a recommended word count of 1,500 words and covers ACs 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.6, 2.1 and 2.2, and section 2, which is 500 words covering ACs 1.4 and 1.5. Next slide, please. So when entering into the assessment task, you'll see a scenario which is essentially in the context of this assignment or this assessment. The People Practice team has been asked to contribute to the company's annual learning development event, where each department presents an area of good practice. Your manager thinks this will be an excellent opportunity for the department to showcase how evidence-based practice and analytics are used by the people function to inform sound decisions. In readiness for this event, you're required to produce a briefing paper comprising of 2 sections. In a sense, this is just a scenario and sets the context. As I've already explained, it's important that you pay attention to the assessment criteria within the assessment. Next slide, please. So at this part, I'm now going to go through each of the ACs to discuss and point how you can cover these without giving away the answers. So the first one is assessment criteria 1.1, which requires you to explain what evidence-based practice is and how it might be applied within the organisation. So you'll see there's two components to that, really. You've got to explain what evidence-based practice is, and the second part is how it then might be applied within the organisation. So here, you'll be required to explain what evidence-based practice is. And I've just put a pointer there that learners could support their answer with an exemplar model. There's a few models out there that actually is really demonstrating the flow of what evidence-based practice is, but also you could use a grounded example of what evidence-based practice basically is. Here you also need to pick out the components of the process and its relevance and application to people practice. Key writers around this area is Behrens, Russo and Briner. They've been writing on evidence-based practice for quite some time now. Also here, the response should identify different types of evidence-based practice and how these can be applied in organisations to inform objective and fair judgments and outcomes. Again, this could be scientific, organisational metrics, experiential, going to practitioners with more experience or specific areas of expertise, or stakeholder evidence such as customer reviews, etc. But really, I think the key thing here is that you're able to use these forms of evidence through a principle-led ethical and fair process. Next slide, please. AC 1.2, this requires you to explain the importance of using data in organisations and why there is a need to ensure the data is accurate when determining problems and issues. I think here what you need to do is explain the importance of using various types of data in an accurate and true manner to determine problems and issues. This could be descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, prescriptive. Here, you need to really highlight the importance that the data forms have on organisational culture, performance and perception. For example, positive and negative results from staff surveys, high staff turnover, conflict, change, etc. Also, it could be worth talking here about reliability and validity of the data. So these are quite important, such as the sample size. You know, a sample of 2 people giving you 100% positive outcomes isn't really a deep enough sample. The timeliness of the data, is it still relevant? Accuracy, is the subjectivity in it, you know, essentially what you're trying to do is ensure that the data is true, accurate, reliable and valid. Next slide, please. So AC 1.3, explain the different types of data measurements that people professionals use. Here, you'll need to explain the various forms of data that can be used. This could be qualitative, such as expressed as a number, such as labour turnover, absent rates, etc. over time, EDI data, absent rates over a period of time, and qualitative, which is based on meaning, things and patterns that come out of words. These could include records from disciplinary and grievance investigations, performance appraisals, exit interviews, capturing employee voice for employee relations, etc. Could also be focus groups. Next slide, please. AC 1.6, explain how the application of agreed policies and procedures inform decisions. Again, this is an area that a lot of learners don't seem to get right, but what you need to do here is explain how evidence taken from agreed policies and procedures and practice inform decisions. So what you're doing is showing awareness of the types of policies and procedures, and you can use the ones in your own organisations, or you can actually do research on this to actually support your answer in how these support and drive customer-focused strategies in providing regulations and guidelines. So in a sense, policies define how the organisation wants to handle key aspects of people practice. It's about ensuring compliancy with legislation and law, providing guidance and aligning to a positive culture in that it provides procedural fairness and transparency and consistency when being applied. Here you can use any of the policies and practices or procedures in your organisation or that you're aware of in terms of the employee life cycle. An example could be disciplinary processes, organisational rules. Also, the reason why the application of agreed policies is because sometimes they'll need changing, so they'll need redrafting, and they'll reduce the risk of liability. Next slide, please. So AC 2.1, explain how people professionals create value for people, organisations and wider stakeholders. Here you need to explain the role that people professionals or HR practitioners play in value creation for the organisation. This could be evidence through examples such as supporting robust selection and hiring of new employees, ensuring efficient onboarding and socialisation of new employees, developing employees through robust L&D processes and practices, fair reward processes, high engagement, underpinned by ethical and fair principles. Next slide, please. AC 2.2, summarize the ways in which you can be customer focused and standard driven in your own context. Again, this is actually asking you to give your summary on the way that you can be customer focused within the context of your own position, basically. So here you need to highlight the importance of achieving and maintaining a strong customer focus within your own role. Examples might consider linking the company and personal KPIs such as growth of customer base, high customer satisfaction. Internally, it could be supporting employees within their role, colleagues, line managers and senior managers through guidance of policies and practices. External customers that you might deal with could be such as outsourced provisions, such as business partners, how you maintain standards, how you're morally ethical, how you support. More contemporary approaches is how you align skills and competencies to growth, green agendas, etc. Next slide, please. So section 2 is the shorter section, which is 500 words. For section 2, you're required to provide a practical working example of how the people practice team examines, interprets, and it presents the findings of data in different diagrammatical formats. Next slide, please. So the first part of this, you're given some spreadsheets, some Excel spreadsheets that are embedded in the assignment. The first one is AC 1.4, which requires you to conduct common calculations to interpret data. So here you're required to respond to the leavers data as shown in table 1, which shows the number of employees leaving the organisation over a yearly period. What you need to do here is conduct the common calculations, calculate the overall number of leavers, and show us in a percentage the different reasons for employees leaving, work out the average length of service in each team and rank them in ascending order, and rank as a percentage each department in turnover. Next slide, please. So AC 1.5 continues where you present the findings in different formats to enable informed decision making. Here you need to consider what are the 2 most appropriate forms to display their findings, as there is a variety of diagrammatical forms that can be used. I think the important thing there's no real hard and fast way of doing this. It's what's the most persuasive. Remember, data in management groups is often spread via laptops or in paper form. So what is going to be the easiest for them to actually see? So you're explaining it and illustrating what's happening. And often this could be in terms of visual impact and persuasiveness, such as bar or pie charts. And then from the analysis of the findings, you need to then comment on any issues that might be revealed in the data and recommend potential solutions. So you might actually see key points within the data, such as you could be seeing issues or problems that could be being predicted for future, such as there's not so many people in that department, or they're all coming to retirement age, or there's high absence here. What you need to do here is essentially write about that in terms, so you've got a bit of supposition here that you can actually do some predictions of what you might be seeing in the data. What is the data telling you? And basically, what are you actually presenting in terms of what might need to be done in terms of the data. Next slide, please. So, yeah, just to finally just put a line here. Consider carefully compliance to the word count as laid down in the CIPD word count policy, which was issued in January 2023. What you've got is you must stay within the word count, and you've got a plus minus 10%. Anything over that would mean potentially you're actually going over word count, and that would be detrimental to you actually passing the unit. So also here, if you include any reference to theorists, models, academic literature, case study examples in your assessment, you need to acknowledge these at the end of your work. You're not required to do Harvard Convention. I mean, it's commendable if you do, but generally, so long as you cite the work that you're actually drawing on, so you're not plagiarizing, then that's fine. So long as you're acknowledging these sources. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the end of the webinar. I wish you luck and thank you for listening.